$1. That is what the sharpest edge in this video costs. One replaceable scalpel blade about $1 a piece. The knife holding it runs $48. The knife it outcuts on a whitetail costs $333. The ruler is not which steel wins on paper. It is which knife is still cutting when you are halfway through the animal with cold hands. 3 things decide it: how long the edge lasts, whether it chips on bone, and whether you can bring it back without a diamond plate. Worst to best, 5 knives under $60. Subscribe if you want somebody checking these numbers before you spend yours. Number 5 is the Victorinox 6-inch boning knife, and it costs somewhere between $30 and $40 depending on the week and the retailer. I spent years behind a sporting goods counter watching guys walk past this thing to spend $200 on a fixed blade with a leather sheath and a maker's mark, and the boning knife is the one the meat processors in the back were using. Victorinox names the alloy on the spec sheet, which matters more than it sounds like it should. The steel is X55 CRMO 14. That is roughly 0.5% carbon and around 14% chromium. Victorinox claims a hardness of 56 on the Rockwell C scale and an edge ground at 15 degrees per side. Claims, not measurements. I want that word in your ear early because every hardness number in this video is what the manufacturer says about its own product. Not something taken off a tested batch, and nobody publishes batch-by-batch hardness on a $30 knife. What that combination buys you is a blade that flexes. 6 inches, thin, and it bends around the shape of a bone instead of fighting it. There is a whole category of $300 hunting knives built the opposite way. Thick spine, stiff as a pry bar, ground for battening wood and cutting seatbelts and every other thing that has nothing to do with a deer. On the one axis of following a joint line, this $30 kitchen tool beats them, and it is not close. Geometry decides cutting performance as much as alloy does, and the guys who break down animals for a living every day of the week are not carrying a 1/4-inch spine. So why is it last? 2 reasons, both concrete. It ships without a sheath. A knife with no sheath is not a field knife. It is a knife you have to solve a second problem for, and any sheath you buy pushes the real cost up. Every price in this video is total price, knife plus a usable sheath, because a $50 knife that needs a $20 sheath is a $70 knife. The second reason is that the same flex that makes it good at following a joint makes it wrong for the first cut of field dressing, where you want a blade that goes exactly where you point it. There is a third thing worth putting on the record here, and it applies to every knife on this list. The handle matters more than the spec sheets ever admit, because you are not holding a dry handle. Victorinox uses its textured synthetic handle on the boning line, and the texture is the point. It is a grip designed for a commercial kitchen where hands are wet all shift. That is a design intention stated by the maker, not a measurement, and I am not going to dress it up as one. But of all the axes that get left out of knife comparisons, what the handle does when it is slick is the one that costs people the most, and it is the reason a beautiful stabilized wood scale on a premium knife is not automatically an upgrade. Victorinox does back it with a lifetime warranty against defects, and the alloy is corrosion resistant enough at 14% chromium that blood and a wet pack are not going to ruin it. Corrosion resistance is not a headline feature. It is the thing that quietly decides whether a knife that lived in a pack all week is a knife or a project. It earns its spot. It just earns the bottom one. Number 4 is the Buck 110 Folding Hunter, and I want to handle this one carefully because it is the knife most likely to be sitting in your grandfather's dresser drawer. Buck names its alloy 420HC, run through the heat treatment protocol Buck attributes to Paul Boss. Buck claims 58 Rockwell C. Again, claim. Street price sits right around $55 for the standard model, and it comes with the leather sheath, so 55 is the whole number, not the starting number. Here is where it gets interesting, and here is where the marketing on both ends of the price range falls apart. There is a metallurgist named Laren Thomas who publishes steel ratings, toughness, edge retention, corrosion resistance, each on a 10-point scale measured at comparable hardness. 420HC scores a 9 out of 10 for toughness. It scores a 2.5 out of 10 for edge retention. 2.5. That is close to the floor of the entire chart. If you have ever had somebody tell you Buck steel does not hold an edge, they were not wrong, and no amount of loyalty to the brand changes the number. But look at the other end of that same chart. Thomas is blunt about the trade-off. Toughness and edge retention pull against each other, and there is no steel that scores high in both. His words are that there is no such thing as a steel that is a 10 in both, or even a 7 in both. So the $300 knives that hold an edge forever are buying that with something. What they are buying it with is toughness, the resistance to chipping, and the ability to be sharpened by a normal human being with a normal stone. That second part is the axis nobody ranks by, and it is the axis where this $55 folder beats knives at 6 times the price. There are premium hunting knives out there running high vanadium alloys, and those alloys are loaded with hard carbides that a standard stone will not cut. You need diamond. A 420 HC blade comes back on almost anything, including the back of a ceramic mug, which is why it is still in production 5 decades in. On a long day with an animal down and the light going, the knife you can bring back beats the knife that was sharper this morning. 2 more numbers before we move, because the toughness score is not the only place 420 HC does well. Thomas rates it an 8 out of 10 for corrosion resistance. 8. That is a stainless alloy behaving like a stainless alloy, and it is better than several steels people pay a great deal more for. And it is made in the United States, in a factory that has been running the same heat treatment protocol for decades, with a warranty behind it that Buck has honored for longer than most of the premium brands in this video have existed. None of that shows up in a cutting test. All of it shows up in whether the knife is still in service in 20 years. It sits at 4 and not higher for reasons that are just as concrete. It is a folder, which means a pivot, which means a place for material to collect that a fixed blade does not have. It is heavy for what it is. This is a brass-bolstered pocket anvil, not an ounce counting knife. And that 2.5 edge retention score is real, not theoretical. This blade will need attention partway through, and if you are the kind of person who does not want to stop and deal with that, this is not your knife. While we are here, the Buck 119 did not make this list, and it is worth saying why, because it was on my short list until I checked the number. Street price on the 119 in 2026 has moved to right around $100. Late 2025, it was in the mid-70s. That is a substantial jump inside a year, and it puts a knife that used to be the default cheap fixed blade well over the $60 ceiling. The list has a ceiling. It does not have exceptions. Number 3 is the Morikniv Companion, and depending on the version and the day, it costs between $17 and $24, sheath included. Morikniv names the alloy Sandvik 12C27 on the stainless version, which is about 0.6% carbon and 13.5% chromium. The claimed hardness is 56.5. The carbon version uses a different alloy at a claimed 58.5 and runs a little cheaper still. The reason this is a real hunting knife and not a novelty comes down to what that alloy family does. Thomas puts the group this steel belongs to, the fine-grained stainless family that includes AEB-L and 14C28N, at the top of the high toughness bracket among stainless steels. High toughness means resistance to chipping. And chipping is the failure mode that actually ends a knife's usefulness on an animal, because bone is what breaks edges. A rolled edge you can work with. A chipped edge is a series of tiny craters, and no amount of stropping in the field fixes it. Now compare that to what is sitting in the premium racks. There are well-regarded hunting knives selling in the $68 to $77 range and well above it built on D2. D2 has a reputation as a premium tool steel, and it earns part of that reputation, but toughness is not where it earns it. It is a comparatively brittle steel, and it is not a true stainless either. The chromium in it is largely locked up in carbides rather than available to protect the surface. So, on the single axis of not chipping when it meets bone, a $20 Swedish knife has an argument against a knife at 3 and 4 times the price, and that argument comes from published metallurgy, not from a forum. And I want to point at those D2 knives for a second longer, because 2 of them were candidates for this list and both were cut by the same gate. A well-known American maker's Compact D2 hunting knife sits between $68 and $77 at the retailers I checked in 2026. That is a fine knife with a leather sheath and a real reputation. It is also over the ceiling. The ceiling in this video is $60 total, sheath included, and the moment you start making exceptions for knives you like, the list stops being a list and becomes a preference. So it is out, and the knife that costs a quarter of it and chips less is in. The other thing the Mora has is grind. It is a Scandinavian grind, a single flat bevel running down to the edge with no secondary micro bevel to speak of. Two consequences. It is thin behind the edge, which is the property that determines whether a blade slices or wedges. And it is the easiest grind on earth to maintain because you lay the bevel flat on the stone and the geometry finds the angle for you. No jig, no angle guide, no guessing. Why 3 and not higher? Two honest deductions. The companion is not a full tang. The tang runs partway into the handle, not to the butt. For cutting up an animal, that is a non-issue, and I want to be careful not to turn a construction detail into a scare story, because the failures people cite for partial tang knives come from prying and batoning, which is not what this list is about. But it is a real difference from what you get at the higher price, and I am not going to pretend it is not there. The other deduction is the sheath. It is polypropylene, it works, it retains the blade, and it feels exactly like what it costs. And the last deduction is the big one. This knife, like the two below it, still has to be sharpened. Which is the whole reason the top two are the top two. Number 2 is the Outdoor Edge Razor Light, and the system it belongs to is the reason it is here. Roughly $45 puts a handle in your pocket with 6 blades and a sheath. The blades are Japanese 420J2. Outdoor Edge names the alloy, which is worth acknowledging, because the pattern with replaceable blade knives is that most makers will not. 420J2 is soft. It is a low-carbon stainless that sits near the bottom of any hardness ranking you care to consult, and on a fixed blade that you intend to keep, it would be a mark against the knife. Here it is close to irrelevant, and that is the pivot this whole video turns on. You are not maintaining this edge, you are discarding it. The alloy only has to be good enough to survive one animal's worth of work, and then it goes in the sharps container and a new one goes in. Steel that would be a defect in a knife you own for 30 years is a non-factor in a blade you own for one afternoon. Run the arithmetic on that because it is the part that gets skipped. $45 puts 6 blades in your hand at the start. Replacement blades in this category run in the neighborhood of $1 each in a box. So the cost of being sharp for this system is measured in single dollars per season for most people, and the comparison is not against the purchase price of a premium knife. It is against the purchase price plus the sharpening equipment plus the time. A diamond plate capable of maintaining a high vanadium premium alloy is itself a meaningful purchase. The cheap system does not need one. It does not need any sharpening equipment at all, which is a sentence I would not have believed at the counter 15 years ago. What separates this from number 1 is the mechanism and the mass. Outdoor Edge builds its blade change around a lock that captures the blade in a channel rather than clamping it at one point. And Outdoor Life named the model in this family the easiest blade change in the category in their 2026 testing. That was the Razor Pro L specifically, though the change system is shared across the line. The trade-off is that it is a heavier, chunkier tool than what beat it, with a thicker blade that is less keen out of the package. If the idea of a scalpel edge in a folding handle makes you nervous, and there are plenty of people who feel that way, and it is a fair thing to feel, this is the version of the concept that will bother you least. Before the winner, one thing, because it decides whether you should trust the ordering at all. Nobody paid for a slot in this list. There are no affiliate links under this video, there is no brand that sent anything, and there is no arrangement where a company that makes a $300 knife gets treated gently. That is not a moral posture, it is a structural one. A list that can be bought is a catalog, and a catalog is worth nothing to you. The only thing this channel has to sell is that the ranking means something. And that is also why I owe you the other side before the reveal, because the case for the expensive knife is stronger than the title of this video suggests. Here is what $300 actually buys, stated straight. It buys edge retention that the cheap steels cannot approach. Crucible's own figure for one of the premium powder stainless alloys used in high-end hunting knives puts its cutting performance at 143% of 440C on the standard CATRA test. That is a laboratory protocol, published method, not somebody's impression. Against a steel scoring 2.5 out of 10, that is not a small gap, it is a category difference. It buys corrosion resistance that the cheap alloys cannot approach either. Thomas rates one of the newer premium alloys around 9.5 out of 10 for corrosion, better than the older premium stainless steels, and he says so directly. If you are the person who puts a bloody knife in a pack and finds it 4 days later, that number is worth money to you. It buys full-tang construction and materials that were selected rather than made to a price, and it buys service. The lifetime warranty and factory resharpening programs the premium makers run are real, and they are not marketing fluff. So the honest version of this video is not that expensive knives are a scam. It is narrower than that, and it survives scrutiny where the broad version does not. Above roughly $150, what the money buys is durability of the edge across many animals, corrosion resistance across many seasons, and a knife your kid will still be using. What it does not buy is more cutting capacity on one deer on one night, and that distinction is the entire ranking. Which brings us to number 1, and it costs $47.95. The Havalon Paranta edge weighs 1.5 ounces. It ships with 12 replaceable blades and a holster, and the blades are the surgical pattern, the same geometry that gets used for cutting things far more delicate than an animal. A fresh one of those runs about $1. Here is the claim, stated as narrowly as it can be stated so it holds up. On the axis of how sharp the edge is at the moment you are using it, a $48 handle with a $1 blade beats a $333 knife. And I want to be specific about which $300 knife, because this is where a lot of comparisons cheat. The premium production knife I am talking about is the version built on the high-end powder stainless alloy with a manufacturer's list price of $370 and a street price around $333. The same model exists in a lower-cost alloy at roughly $140 to $160, and if somebody shows you that one and calls it the $300 knife, they are moving the goalposts. The comparison in this video is against the expensive one. No sharpened edge is as sharp as a blade that was never used. That is not an opinion about knives, it is what sharpening is. You are removing metal to reconstruct an edge that has been damaged, and reconstruction is not the same as new. The premium blade starts extremely sharp and degrades slowly. The replaceable blade starts extremely sharp, degrades quickly, and then gets thrown away and replaced with another one that starts extremely sharp. Over the course of one animal, the second curve stays above the first. That is the inversion, and it is the only version of the inversion I am willing to defend, because it is the only one the evidence supports. Now the deductions, and there are real ones. Havalon does not name the alloy in its blades. The company describes them as surgical stainless, and surgical stainless is not a steel, it is a category. I am not going to turn that into an accusation about quality. A manufacturer choosing not to publish an alloy is a transparency fact, not a defect, and a disposable blade is the one place where the alloy matters least. But it is a fact, and you deserve to know it is a fact, especially in a video that just spent 10 minutes insisting that a named alloy is the price of admission. This knife gets in on the strength of the system, not the metallurgy, and I would rather say that out loud than paper over it. One more thing in its favor that has nothing to do with steel, 1.5 ounces. That is the whole knife. There are premium fixed blades in this comparison that weigh 4 and 5 times that before you add a sheath. And if you are the kind of hunter who counts ounces going up a mountain, the winner of this list is not merely cheaper than the alternative, it is a different category of load. The holster it ships in is nylon and unremarkable, and it is included, which keeps the total at the number on the tag rather than the number on the tag plus a sheath. The other deduction is that these blades are thin. Thin is what makes them cut like they do, and thin is also what makes them the wrong tool for anything heavy. A knife is not a chisel, and this one least of all. If your idea of a hunting knife includes tasks that have nothing to do with an animal, the winner of this list is not the knife you want. Number 4 is, and I said so. So where is the floor? Because a video that argues cheap is good has an obligation to say where cheap stops being good, and the answer is not a single number. It depends on what you are buying. For a knife you sharpen and keep, the floor sits right about $15 to $17, and that floor is defined by a spec sheet rather than by a price tag. Below it, you land in the territory where the packaging says surgical stainless or high-carbon stainless, and the manufacturer will not tell you the alloy or the hardness, and unlike the disposable blade case, here you are buying that metal for the long haul with no idea what it is. That is where genuinely bad knives live. Not because a cheap knife is cursed, but because the makers who will name the steel do it at $17, and the ones who will not are telling you something by declining. For a replaceable blade system, there is no metallurgical floor worth talking about because you are not keeping the metal. The floor there is the handle, the lock, and the sheath, whether the blade stays where it is supposed to stay. That is a mechanical question, and it is the reason there is a $15 entry in this category that I did not rank, even though its blades are cross-compatible with the winners. A few things I am not going to tell you, and I would rather be explicit about them than let them sit as an implication. I am not going to tell you these knives were tested here. They were not. Every hardness figure in this video is what the manufacturer publishes about its own product. Every alloy rating comes from published metallurgical work by name people using stated methods. Every price was pulled from American retailers in 2026, and prices in this category have been moving fast enough that you should check before you buy. The buck 119 going from the mid-70s to $100 inside a year is the proof of that. I am not going to tell you a brand makes bad products because it does not publish an alloy. Those are two different sentences, and only one of them is supported. And I am not going to tell you the premium makers are running a con. They are selling steel that measures better on the tests that steel gets measured on, warranties that get honored, and construction that outlasts the buyer. All of that is real. It is just aimed at a use case, many animals, many seasons, one knife, that is not the use case most people are actually buying for. $1. One blade replaced when it stops cutting. That is the thing the $300 knife cannot beat on the night it matters, and the reason is not that the expensive steel is bad. It is that sharp is a condition, not a purchase, and there is exactly one way to guarantee the condition. Buy the handle. Buy a box of blades. Put the difference toward the tag.